We talked yesterday about how the pandemic has, in so many ways, fast forwarded the future and accelerated many of the technologies which are transforming the way we live, from remote work to e-commerce, from drones to robotics and automation. And even well before COVID, there was a great deal of concern about automation and AI and what it means for jobs and employment. So in the face of huge waves of job losses triggered by the pandemic, I think those concerns are more daunting than ever. And it couldn't be a better time to be talking about this issue because only yesterday we had some pretty alarming figures which showed UK unemployment at creeping up at 4.8% and a record number of young people out of work as a result of the pandemic. And as we all know, the workplace has been utterly disrupted by COVID, more than we could ever have imagined, but much more is to come. Robotics and AI promise to change every facet of our careers. So joining me here to discuss these issues and to moderate our next panel is Harry DeQuetteville, the Telegraph's special correspondent for technology, who is going to host our next panel on the future of work. Over to you, Harry.
Thanks very much, Robin. It's really the most critical of subjects. All of us rely on our jobs, and it is undoubted that there's going to be a decade of short-term change, which is going to be dramatic. So often in tech, we talk about the long view, but robotics and AI are changing things now. People are losing their jobs now. A quarter more of supermarket checkout sales staff have lost their jobs in the last few years. We've all seen it happen in front of our eyes. We've helped it happen by training those systems. And so I'm welcoming a panel here to discuss how far automation is going to change the job marketplace for us humans and what we can do to react and respond to that automation. Because let's face it, in human history, it's hardly the first time that automation has taken away jobs. So with me here, I've got a fantastic panel. We're going to start with Dr. Iain Brown. He's head of data science at SAS, not the military unit SAS, but the data analytics firm, very famous, and a computer scientist himself, a specialist in AI. So he's here, Iain. We've also got Tera Allas. She's the director of research at McKinsey, the global consultancy. They do a huge amount of work on projecting the future employment, the future of work, reports, studying around the world, also specializing in some reports they've done recently on the future of work in Europe and what that might mean for the next decade ahead. So it's fantastic to have Tera with us. And then Robert Jamieson, who is Chief of Digital and Technology at L&G and has been leading digital transformation there, a computer science background himself, and someone who will see firsthand the transformations that digital technologies are having, not just on the workforce at L&G, but also among clients of his company. So I think it's a perfect trio of guests to get to grips with this subject. And Tera, I wanted to start with you first, really, because I know McKinsey has done a huge amount of work on this, and I want to cite a stat from your Future of Work report recently, which was that 50% of all activities currently done in the workplace are potentially automatable by currently demonstratable technology. That's half of all jobs. And obviously that skews even worse for lower paid jobs. But in Europe, you say 59 million jobs, that's a quarter of the total, are at risk. And we're not talking short term, we're talking long term, we're talking perhaps in the next few years, in the next decade. Are things really as bad as that?
Couple of really important points to bring out there, but absolutely the starting point is that 50% of all the activities we all do at work actually could already be automated using today's technology. But a couple of key distinctions. The first one is that, of course, the potential is very, very different from actual adoption. And so even though maybe by 2060, everything we do could be done by machines, it's very unlikely that it will be. because there are still many, many areas in which humans have a comparative advantage. And then, of course, it's also to do with the economics. Does it make sense to automate it? Especially in areas where labor is really cheap, it's probably still more economical for businesses to continue to use humans. Now, it is skewed towards the lower paid, and the figure that you quoted about the number of jobs that need to be transitioned is very much a need for people to find new jobs. Our overall estimate is that net, actually automation, AI, digitization, all of these new technologies will not destroy jobs in total, but new jobs will be created and old jobs will be destroyed, as has always been the case. And so that means that a huge number of people will need to retrain, upskill and reskill in order to be able to do the jobs of the future. And that will be a challenge because of the speed of the transition.
I mean, that's what I want to get to is this a new phenomenon? Is this worse than before with the power loom weavers of the Industrial Revolution, being put out of work by the power loom? Is this different from the stable hands in central London being put out of work because of the arrival of the automobile? Are we seeing something fundamentally new here, do you think?
So the new element is that basically, this is the first time really that we're seeing computers and machines, robots and whatever sort of creep into the areas we all thought were human only areas, like language processing or, being able to produce language that sounds very much like humans, or indeed image processing. All those things have advanced really dramatically in the last couple of years. So in that sense, it's new. My views of the actual transition and what we'll do to people's jobs is that it isn't dramatically different, in the sense that all of our jobs have already been changing all the time, and the labor market has already been kind of growing much more in the more professional and the higher educated end of the market. And so it is a continued kind of transition in that direction, the speed of which is now even more uncertain because of COVID. There are reasons to believe that it'll be faster in some sectors where, humans turn out to be, difficult to work with because of social distancing restrictions or hygiene requirements. Whereas in other sectors, COVID has just brought a lot of uncertainty, and many businesses may well be hesitating about technology and investing in technology. And so I think we're going to see a lot of divergence by sector and by company as well. So it's not, in my view, a kind of uniform picture.
Thanks so much. Iain, I want to come to you now. What Tera's saying there is so interesting, because essentially she's saying that this is a new phase because the level of AI, the level of technology now really begins to encroach on areas which we previously thought of as the preserve of humans, things that we alone could do. I want to come to that. She talked about artificial intelligence, NLP, natural language processing, and we've seen the great advances of a new technology called GPT-3 in recent weeks. You're at the heart of this with your work. Tell us a bit about what you're seeing. Is it as dramatic as Tera's outlining there?
So I'd agree with a number of Tera's points. I'd still personally see this more of an evolution as opposed to a revolution. And we are moving at pace, but we are adding capabilities, and organizations are adding capabilities incrementally. I like the quote from the famous American-Canadian sci-fi writer William Gibson, that the future is already here. It's just not very well distributed. And I'd say that's the case for most organizations. There's a lot of work going into adding automation into systems, but at the same time, the most use of it is augmenting human efforts as it is today. And we mentioned there around a number of the advances around computer vision, around natural language understanding, generation and processing. And these are really enhancing what we're seeing in the market in terms of jobs that are happening today. I would also say, and this echoes the statement from the World Economic Forum, their latest 2020 report on jobs of the future, that we see more jobs being created from this than there are job losses. But the requirements are going to be on governments, it's going to be on organizations to skill and reskill individuals and employees with the new capabilities and new knowledge that's needed to work in an ever evolving technological environment.
Yeah, I think that's so critical, isn't it? And I think as we go through this discussion, we're going to find out that the future of work may actually be about the future of education and training, or may actually be about the future of what we prize economically, and the impacts may be there. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. Robert, I wanted to come to you now because our other two panelists have said it's an evolution. Well, not if you're a Top Gun fighter pilot. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in America, recently ran a dogfight between one of their Top Guns and an AI pilot, and the Top Gun was shot down 5 times out of 5. So it's pretty bad news if you're Tom Cruise. What's it like if you're L&G? What are you seeing concretely, the processes that you've had to introduce in your workforce and among clients?
I mean, I think across the panelists, I would, and also yourself. So I would agree, it's about education, but it's also about networking and accessibility. And I think what COVID has accelerated is that accessibility. For instance, people can tap me up on many different ways that perhaps before COVID you'd have to book an appointment. That provides opportunity. I also agree that I think AI is augmenting us. You've got plenty of examples around that, from a surgeon that's in London using AI and a machine in the United States to help him perform an operation. And I think that's I think that's exciting. If you think about photography, 50 years ago you'd have had to have film. It would have been the preserve of the few. Now everyone has a phone. They can take photographs. They can put them on TikTok. They can create videos. They can monetize it. There are a lot of opportunities here, and the United Kingdom has been incredibly successful at this for hundreds of years, and we remain a high income, high opportunity, world class country in so many areas, and I think that will continue and accelerate.
Well, that's fascinating. Let's come straight onto it then. Where do the opportunities of the future lie? If we say that it's not going to be a pure doom and gloom story, but actually an optimistic story with perhaps a net gain of jobs, where are those jobs going to be in the future? We've seen a huge amount about empathy and emotional skills. Robots are pretty bad at empathizing. Humans are pretty good at it, or some of us are. Some of us are pretty bad at it. But there is an element where perhaps there's a future for care workers, for teachers, where there's a prediction of growth in jobs because these aren't really automatable skills, these emotional skills. That's a classic area, I think, Tera, coming to you, of a growth area. Am I right that emotion is going to play a more critical part? And what other areas do you see a boom in?
Indeed. So when we did the following on from kind of jobs lost and jobs gained analysis, an analysis of what skills are going to be in more demand and in less demand in the future, what you find is that, manual, repetitive, routine jobs, and also kind of basic cognitive jobs like adding up numbers or, collating data or entering data, all of those things machines will be able to do better and faster. But the two things that really spiked in terms of requirements for new skills and more skills, just volume wise, are kind of obviously around tech skills. So we will need a lot of deep as well as broad digital and analytical and data science capabilities. But the second most important skill that pops out of that analysis is around social and emotional skills. And literally that just kind of human interaction that robots are indeed still pretty lacking in. And so the big areas for growth then, in addition to IT, are almost certainly going to be in areas like health and social care, but also in marketing, in sales, in customer interaction, and indeed kind of management. And finally, when you mentioned teaching, I think that was also another area that came up as a huge demand for new teaching skills, not just in educational institutions, but actually in work, in coaching, and helping people adapt to these changes, which no doubt require all of us to. I mean, it's basically a challenge for everyone. And the more managers and leaders actually themselves also have some teaching skills, the more they will be able to bring their organization along.
Fascinating. Iain, I want to come to you. Tera that made the clear point that those repetitive skills are perhaps most at risk of automation, but not just them, that basic cognitive skills are at risk. We think of this as a sort of blue-collar phenomenon, to put it basically, but it's not just that, is it? You know, white-collar jobs in accountancy, in the legal world are also at risk. You know, one of the companies on our Tech 100 list of flourishing new British startups is a firm which analyzes legal documents, goes through those thousands of pages of legal documents to pick out the cogent arguments, the essential bits and pieces required. And, you know, when you think about legal teams, so many of those junior staff are engaged in that kind of process.
I'd certainly agree with that, Harry. I think we are seeing a lot of those repetitive tasks that are hitting kind of white-collar jobs as an outcome of the utilization of AI. I would say, though, that, and to further Tera's point, as well as the kind of human interactions that we're seeing more of a reliance on and a need for, creativity is something that is often overlooked within the skills that us as humans can provide that machines cannot. And there's almost a lot of focus on STEM subjects as science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But I'd say that STEAM, so including arts and humanities in that as well, should be a focal area for organizations, but also from an academic perspective. I actually sit on the industry advisory board for Southampton University and lecture there on the use of analytics for marketing in the business school. And we're seeing more and more demand for those types of courses where it's more around the understanding, it's also around the explanation and being able to facilitate more than just adding up of numbers, but also drilling into the problem definition phase of where organizations really want to use AI. And I'd say that's where AI can't really help us today, understanding which data to use, how to use the data, how to process and understand a business problem. We're probably around 40, 50 years by conservative estimates off of true artificial general intelligence, where it has the capabilities to do more of that. So we're still a way out, but that gives us time from an economy and an academic perspective to focus on developing the right skills for the UK to stay competitive and also to make valuable jobs for the future.
Yes, I think it's worth just underlying what Iain was saying there, making this difference for our viewers here, the difference between artificial intelligence, which is sort of human-like thinking, but perhaps in a narrow area, and then this term AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which is machine thinking, which approximates our very general capabilities as humans, that we can, you know, stack shelves, then come back and read a book and make tea, do lots of different things, use our cognitive abilities in lots of different areas. You know, as generalists, we thrive, and machines are quite bad at thriving in general areas. So it's that leap from AI to AGI, from artificial intelligence to artificial general intelligence that Iain was talking about there, is still quite a long way away. Some people don't think it'll ever happen, actually. But Robert, you know, I wanted to come to you and talk about what Iain was saying there about the arts and about creativity, because it sounds slightly self-defeating in a panel called The Future of Work, but sometimes we can make picks and predictions about the future which are actually wrong. You know, I can remember 10 years ago, everyone said, you have to learn Mandarin. It's critical that you learn Mandarin. Start now. Devote all your free time to it, because translation technology was in its infancy and looked very bad. Now, translation technology looks phenomenal. Similarly, 5 years ago, everyone's got to be a coder. You must go to coding school. Well, actually, today, it looks like technology might allow us to tell machines what we would like them to deliver, and they will do the coding. So perhaps picking winners is harder than we think.
I'm a little worried about some of the conversation that somehow there's you can put a human being into a box, that somehow I or you or are a robot in our own right. You talked about accountancy and repetitive tasks. If we ask people what they want, they will say, and we do that in our company, in previous companies, what do you want? And those accountants will say, well, I don't want to spend my day doing repetitive tasks, automate it away. So we do. And that frees them up to do other more valuable things. And it's something they want to do. I think the bit that has to be clear here, you can't just say, and I think you can't just say it's like, we're going to remove your jobs, because we're automating, you have to take people on a journey. You have to take an individual on a journey. What do you want to do next? We are very creative. We build things. We're an incredibly successful species, and that will continue and accelerate.
How hard do you find it practically, though, within your company to take people on that journey, to retrain, to reskill, to make sure that their jobs are fulfilling, to take someone out of an area which is being automated and into a new area where they can be more productive and happier?
It's very hard. As you said, you have to show empathy. Each individual is different. Is different from the next. There's a lot of effort, that has to go into this, and it has to be inclusive. I think that's the key thing: empathy and inclusivity. That you're taking people on the journey, and it's their journey, and they need to own it. And if you set that kind of environment, then a project, any kind of change project, will be more successful.
So the practical steps are just constant reevaluation, sort of constant chatting with managers, line managers, in-role training. What should we all be doing, do you think?
Absolutely. I think it's a combination of those things. Some people don't like change; other people thrive on change. This is when I talk about inclusivity, understanding individuals and what makes them tick. If you do that, they create enormous value for customers, value for shareholders.
Perfect. Tera, I want to come back to you. We've talked about perhaps a reimagining of what we value or what will become valuable, those emotional, empathetic skills that we've talked about. But often at the moment, those skills are the skills that we value least in our economy. People get paid least. Care workers who do perhaps the most important empathetic job of all, are on minimum wage. Teachers and nurses, who clearly have a huge role with emotional support and prioritizing empathy, are paid not very much, certainly not as much as, you might say, options traders on Wall Street, who perhaps do a more potentially automatable job increasingly. So how do we get some of that economic value to jobs which we don't pay? I mean, it's all very well saying we want care workers to be promoted in future and we'll need a lot more care workers. But if we pay all care workers minimum wage, that's going to be pretty hard. And those care workers aren't going to be able to afford to live in cities where property prices are high and be next or near to the people that they need to care for. So how do we address that economic reversal that's required?
It's an incredibly important challenge. And I don't know the full answer, but I do feel that there will be forces that will push politicians in a direction to address it. And the reason I mention politicians is I don't think there's anything that any individual firm or organization can do. It's a kind of societal level change. The good news is that when you ask people what they care about most, they actually care the most about their health, and the second most about their relationships and their loved ones and their families. And then they want to have a job. And it's only at the bottom of that list that they want to have more money on average. And so we need a really kind of serious rethink, I think, in terms of prioritization of public sector resources and public sector operations. And with that needs to come a recognition of the value of the kind of work that you've mentioned. That, it is something that if it were traded on the free market, and thankfully it isn't, because I suspect there would be lots of problems with that too. But if it were, then people would actually be willing to pay a lot for it. And we need those signals to come through the system and start operating. Because as you say, we will have, and we already have, huge shortages in terms of actual humans doing those jobs. And we also have significant shortcomings in making those jobs meaningful, making them not just pay well, but actually the working conditions to be improved. And there I see huge opportunities for technology to actually enhance the experience of the workers and the patients or the customers, or however you want to call them. As long as we kind of keep that human-centric focus, which is hard to do when people get very excited about tech. But as Rob was saying earlier, it's all about empathy and taking people on the journey. And so that's basically another skill that maybe we need to be retraining ourselves and everybody at school on to kind of really bring out the human aspects of how we operate and how the world and how the markets operate as well.
It really sounds a revolution rather than evolution. I know, Iain, that you described it in the reverse terms, but how are you seeing it within your own company, within your clients? Is there a recognition of what Tera's talking about there, about perhaps the scale of a reappraisal of what's valuable as machines take up more and more of what we now think as human tasks?
I would say so. And to go back to my point around a revolution, evolution, this is something that will change dramatically over time. But what I'm saying here is it will still take time to get to that point. I think from what we're seeing from within industry, there is a focus more now on reskilling and bringing the right skills. And gone are the days where you go to university for 3 years and that's it, no more training. I think a lifelong learning needs to be, a mindset needs to be in place within most organizations. And that's something that, as I mentioned, can be both supported by the government. I think we need to create more pathways to social mobility, more investment in education and health are paramount. But at the same time, this is combined with businesses, and the requirement should be on businesses to make sure that they're providing the right skills, training opportunities, the right kind of working conditions for their employees to maximize the opportunities. And this is an opportunity. Most organizations see AI as an opportunity to grow the organization or grow their capabilities or their offerings to their customers. We ran some focus groups just before we went into lockdown with a number of academics, data scientists, so practitioners, as well as business executives. And what came out of that was a strong optimism as to what AI can achieve, but underpinned by putting the right protocols, the right processes in place to make sure that it's governed and appropriately used. So I see this as certainly, and organizations we work with see this as an optimistic outlook with possibilities to be generated from the application of it.
Fascinating. So do you think that ultimately we will need to tell businesses to get on the program and train lifelong learning their staff and do all the things that we've been talking about in this session? Or do you think it'll just be absolutely apparent because it'll be an existential crisis? Either you do it and survive and thrive, or you don't and die.
I think it certainly, Harry, I'd agree with the latter. I think it's in their own interest, and it's something that organizations, a lot are doing today, but they need to be planning for the future to do more. To remain competitive as well, they will need to do that. And we're seeing much more investment in skills throughout the life cycle of an employee's journey within an organization, not just at the point of joining, but throughout their career. And I think general employees will look for that. They'll look for that in their employees to make sure that they are retaining relevance and being kept up to date with the latest changes and additions to the requirements within the working life.
Perfect. Robert, I want to come on to you, and then I want to ask all of you this question. We've got about 5+ minutes. Geography, does that matter so much? I mean, in lots of future of work reports and predictions, geography is critical. And in the last few years, we've seen how geography matters. We see this polarization between town and country. We see post-industrial parts of countries become really struggle. And so I want to know whether that will continue to get worse, whether there'll be this continuing geographic divide between rich and poor, or whether the COVID pandemic might have an upside in that we're beginning to break down geographic barriers, and that if we can get high-speed internet becomes more or less universal, you can live in a post-industrial struggling zone. You can live in the deep, dark countryside, enjoying your beautiful views and your stables and everything to enjoy that, and have a tech career and have a prosperous, high-paying career in ways that I think people have struggled with. So, Robert, to you, do you think geography will matter in future as much as it does now?
No. In short, COVID has introduced a revolution around ways of working. The fact that I'm sitting here in my bare feet, in my shorts, in a shirt, I'm not in those uncomfortable shoes, I'm not traveling, I'm not having to go to a linear desk, I'm not having to spend an hour trying to get to your studio, which is what I would do 12 months ago. There's much more, work-life balance if you get it right. And that's still a work in progress. In terms of geography, whereas perhaps this government might have restricted immigration to do jobs in a particular location, what's already happening are people across the globe tapping me, us, multiple people up for roles, because we suddenly found that it's okay to work in a virtual world for a number of jobs. And I think that is both an opportunity and a threat. And I think that's where governments and ourselves have to get around. How do you keep a population in the United Kingdom working in a virtual way post-COVID and still relevant in the grand scheme of the 7 billion people in the globe? That's interesting.
It's true, isn't it, Tera? I mean, what Robert's putting his finger on there is that when I went to school, I was in a class with 30 others, and that there was competition within that class. Who was number one? Who was number 30? And that was bad enough. Now the competition is, where are you between 7 billion people on the planet? It's a global competition. So whereas we might be beginning to break down some geographic silos, we're also opening up so devastatingly that also might have pretty tricky consequences.
I think you're quite right. I think somebody wrote a book about globotics and the degree to which, if the UK, for example, fails to adopt all this technology to really make the most of it and improve humans' capabilities and augment them, then, there'll be lots of things that, people around the world, especially in Asia, will be able to do remotely and then deliver to the UK. And what's our comparative advantage then? I'd like to just kind of remind ourselves, though, that there will still be a lot of kind of local activities, like a large proportion of our economy is local, which is, for example, demonstrated by the fact that when we look at all the jobs that are being done or have been done, only about 40% of those can actually even theoretically be done remotely. If you're a bus driver, or you're a barista, or you're a dental nurse, or indeed you are, a social care worker, you cannot do those jobs from home. And I think the reason why this is really critical comes back to your point about geography. We're already seeing that, the people who do have very high educations and work in professional settings and often can do their work from home have been not as badly hit by the pandemic as those people who have had to be furloughed because their place of work is not open. And this kind of polarization is quite scary if it goes along with all that automation, because also Iain is quite right that businesses that are thinking about their competitive advantage will retrain their people. We think 75% of retraining and upskilling is actually positive net present value for the business itself. So they should just get on and do it. But sadly, currently, something like 50% of all the people who actually don't have a degree, so they've left school after GCSEs, don't get any training at all. They haven't had any training since they left school. So there's another polarization. People like I and you, we get training all the time, but it's the people who really need the training that are potentially being left behind. And so from a societal perspective, employers can do their part, but I suspect society and governments will need to do theirs as well. Now, coming back to your question about competitiveness, the UK does have a good starting point, as Iain and Rob have already pointed out, but we need to keep investing in the human capital that goes along with the technology. There's a strong kind of R&D base and a strong innovation base in the UK, but we also need the people who can actually make these things into commercial products, and that can then train the next generation of people who can sell those products and can train, our businesses to use those products so that we maintain our competitiveness.
Fantastic. Well, we're coming very nearly to the end of the panel. Iain, don't think you've escaped. I've got one more question for you. It's about AI. You talked about AGI, 40, 50 years. People think of AI, think of robots, these two subjects coming together. They think of Arnold Schwarzenegger. They think maybe robots are going to come too far. AI is going to go too far, that it'll not just catch up with us, but exceed us and render us as a species redundant. So for a fun last 60 seconds, over to you. Where do you think AI is going to go? Is it going to be safe?
It's a very interesting question, Harry, a very contentious question. I think you're referring to almost a singularity at some point where AI will outsmart all of us and take over the world. I don't subscribe to that view. I know others may do. I see this as we're working hand in hand. I see this very much as an augmentation of our abilities, and it's something that we are the creators, and as individuals and as a human race, we're the creators of. But I do think that what comes with that great power comes great responsibility, to coin the commonly used phrase. I think that we need to make sure there's the right protocols in place and the right governance in place. Ethics is at the heart of all of this. I'm a big subscriber to the acronym FATE, which stands for Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Explainability in AI. And I think we need to make sure organizations are putting in ethical practices when they're developing these systems. And I think that's where we need to make sure that whether that's regulated or whether it's something that organizations sign up to as an initiative, that needs to be in place. And we need to be looking at that now rather than further down the line.
Thank you so much. Thank you all three for a fascinating and fantastic panel, packed with, practical stats and insights into what might well happen and how we need to prepare for that future now.